Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Ann Smoke. I'm with the Center for Alternative Dispute Resolution here in the Hawai'i State Judiciary. And I'm really happy to be here today with Lisa Jacobs, a colleague and a friend who I've worked with for a long time. And we are looking forward to this second presentation of the perils or the value and perils of nonverbal communication. We had some good response and a lot of good feedback from the last time we did this back in, what was it, January or February, at least? It was way back.
It was about 6 months ago, yeah.
In COVID times, that's like 10 years. So
right.
we did this at the beginning of this year, and we're looking forward to doing it again because we have made some updates based on a lot of the really good input. So we thank you for that, for those of you who have returned, and a private thank you to those of you who talked with us and shared some good ideas after, who may not be here today. So I'm going to start with a quick introduction. And then we'll jump right in as a few more people are being admitted. So I'm going to start by introducing Lisa. Lisa Jacobs heads her own mediation and collaborative law firm named Better Way Divorce, or Pono Divorce. And she devotes her practice to non-adversarial processes. That's why she's perfect for today's workshop. She's been an Hawaii attorney for almost 30 years, and she's has extensive family law mediation experience. She's the co-chair of the Hawai'i State Bar Association-ADR section and past president of the Conflict Resolution Alliance, where she served on the board of directors since 2014. Lisa also serves on the board of directors of Ohana and the Hawai'i Center for Nonviolence. She was named MCP's Domestic Mediator of the Year in 2016, and just recently, Lisa was also named by MCP. She's going to be given a pro bono award this year, so she keeps her award list fresh. I'm Ann Smoke. I am the Appellate Mediation Program Administrator here at the Center for Alternative Dispute Resolution, and I am also the trainer for state and city and county workplace dispute resolution, meetings, all kinds of things that might fall into conflict resolution or problem solving. So I do the training for those areas. I have been with the Judiciary for 6 years, almost 7 years now, and I've been a trainer in conflict management practice for 15 years. I was with the Matsunaga Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution before this. I got into this when I was working on my master's degree in sustainable tourism, where you can imagine there's plenty of conflict, and that's what piqued my interest in this. And I've spent many years working with various colleagues and my own mentors on policy development and strategic planning initiatives, and facilitating them, rather. I don't think we'll spend too much more time on this part because we want to just jump right in, and I'm going to start with giving you a few of just some things to expect, a little bit of housekeeping for today's meeting. And the first thing is that we are going to be using chat. Well, the first thing is actually I want to say that we're recording. Okay, so if you're not comfortable with that, you need to know right now that we're going to be recording this, and there is a likely chance that this recording will be posted on the University Matsunaga Institute for Peace website and our own website once we do a little bit of editing. So heads up to that. Also, chat, we've got chat turned on. We like to hear from you in chat. However, we are going to ask you to keep the general chat to everybody to a minimum, because we're going to be using that during our exercises today. Okay, so we're going to be asking some questions, asking for some input or suggestions or ideas, and we're going to be using the chat for that because of the number. We've got over 100 people here today, and we're not going to be able to really open it a lot for dialogue. That's not to say if you don't have something urgent or some time-sensitive question that you must get out, please, use your nonverbal cues. Something, anything, let us know that you need to speak, or just go ahead and unmute yourself and make yourself be known so we can address it right away. Otherwise, keep general chat to a minimum so we can use it effectively and so Lisa and I can better monitor it. If we don't see something you've put in chat, if we miss the point that you've made in chat, don't take it personally. It's just because we're focused on the presentation today, and with a lot of chat coming in, sometimes that can be missed. Okay. Lisa, am I forgetting anything? Oh, just remember to keep yourself mute as well, unless, like I said, you've got that urgent thing that you have to contribute. We're going to be showing a PowerPoint throughout. We will be stopping periodically to check in with you, and that's the time you can use the general chat if you want to enter something, a question or a comment. All right, and there will be a few breakout rooms, and we've got some ground rules for the breakout rooms we'll get to as soon as we get that started. All right, so Lisa, did I miss anything?
We did, hopefully if this all goes well with timing, built in about 10 minutes towards the end for those of you who do want to unmute yourself and do want to share like a best practice tip on nonverbal communication awareness. So there will, hopefully we'll be able to still reserve that time if you choose to want to speak rather than chat, because the kind of the big picture message to this whole presentation is the more we can do things in person or we can see each other, it's just more helpful information we can to communicate more effectively. So that's why we were kind of like, even before this started, we were gently encouraging people, if you could turn on your video, that, we're not going to insist that, but that just helps with just the whole flavor of this workshop. So we are going to try to keep the last 10 minutes reserved for best tips, a little chat time, or if you choose to unmute yourself and want to share something, we will welcome that. Okay. But I think without further ado, we can go ahead and start. And I'm continuing to admit people. We're up to 116 people. So.
All right, excellent. So I'm going to start the PowerPoint, everybody. I hope you can all see what I'm seeing, because if that's the case, then we're in good shape. Thumbs up if you're seeing the PowerPoint. All right, there we go. First lesson in nonverbal communication. Thumbs up. All right, let's just get this up and running here. All right, so before we begin, oops, let me just. All right, before we begin, I want to make a point that nonverbal communication, like any communication, is highly contextual. Okay, especially in critical decision-making discussions, during contentious conversations, or in efforts to build more peaceful relationships. When entering any type of dialogue, and especially facilitated discussions, it's critical that we heighten our awareness of who's in the room first, and then be acutely aware of the nonverbal cues and gestures that we use, knowing what is appropriate or what might be misinterpreted. We delivered today's workshop from a Western context in which both Lisa and I mostly work. Okay, I want to qualify that. And we also will be offering a few tips that can apply more universally in any cultural setting. And they can be, all of them can be effective toward building trust. With that, we're going to start by offering the first two tips. And we're hoping that this is going to get you off to a good start with any dialogue. And the first one, I'm going to reiterate what I just said. Make sure you do your homework and come to any facilitated dialogue knowing who will be in the room. Okay. Tip number 2, read the room and its participants and maintain the flexibility to address an unexpected turn. Throughout this workshop, we're going to draw attention to the types of body language to pay particularly close attention to so you don't miss an important signal of uncertainty or of discomfort or of confusion. Okay, if participants appear to be distracted in one of these ways, it's up to you to model good nonverbal behavior, to take pause, share your observations, and see if you can help determine whether participants are ready to move on. What isn't said is often the most important piece of information that you have, especially if it's regarding conflict resolution. Fave business consultant and author Peter Drucker more succinctly put it that the most important thing that can be said is what isn't said. Okay, and as our colleague Chuck Crumpton puts it, make your ability to to pay attention as multi-directional as you can and digest what you pick up on the way. So it really means paying attention, being aware. In other words, if you're less directive and more attentive and more responsive, and if you show a sincere respect and an honest attempt to understand and honor everybody in the room, you've already started to build a trusting environment. So let's get started. In a BBC Work Life article that I recently read in preparation for this workshop called "The Tricks to Make Yourself Effortlessly Charming," author Tiffany Wen asserts that from the first moment you walk into a room, people are making judgments about how much they like you, and mostly without intent. We do the same to others. Think about that and what such judgments are based on. The factors that determine our success with other people and the impressions that we make upon them, even before we meet them, are elements of nonverbal communication. Research has proven the people we meet often make judgments about us based purely on the way we look, from our clothing to our posture, to our physical characteristics, and our facial expressions. Lisa?
Okay. So as you can see from this slide, only about 7% of communication that we do comes from the actual words that we speak. So 93% of communication is expressed via nonverbal means. So of that 93%, you can see the breakdown here. About 55% of what we convey to others is exhibited through our body movement, our body language, and 38% is expressed in the tone of our voice and other things related to our voice. So much can be gained from our becoming more and more aware of our body movements, our vocal tone, our delivery, and a few other things that we put out there before we even open our mouths. And as Anne said, when we meet people that we don't know, we make the most significant impressions just the first few minutes. So and the nonverbal cues, again, comprise over 90% of what we are conveying to others. So, and also keep in mind that this breakdown is for in-person meetings. The percentage breakdown is a little bit different when it comes to meetings over the phone. If you don't have the visual cues, the breakdown is 18%. If you're speaking to somebody on the phone, about 18% of what you are communicating is communicated through your words, and a whopping 82% is communicated via the tone of your voice. If you take out the visual cues and the audio cues and you're down to text or email, then you have nothing other than the words written themselves. And there's no nonverbal cues that can really help you. And so if somebody says, thank you, you don't really know what they might mean. And a lot of it is contextual based on your prior relationship with them. If you're right now you're in a good place with that person, if you're not in a good place with that person. So just those words can have very different meanings if all you have are those words. Okay, next slide.
So all of the elements of communication are what make dialogue rich and clear. We need to apply all of the tools we have in our toolboxes, and a few that Lisa and I will share today that you might not have, or you might not yet have. A range of ways we might be communicating can include just some of the things you see in this picture. It can include personal space, physical environment or proxemics, which is the use of space, posture, facial expressions, clothing, bodily characteristics, time perception or chronemics, and touch, which would be haptics. So when we finally do start talking, we introduce the last nonverbal element, and that's an important one, and that's tone. So these images show all of the ways that we communicate nonverbally. And each of these pictures actually has some really strong meaning. And the meaning is subject to the interpretation of the receiver, of your interlocutor, as they would say in linguistics. Tone, though, is critical, and I'm going to highlight tone a little bit because the acoustic properties of our voice which is part of paralanguage, is critical. And Lisa just pointed it out a few ways. Just saying the word thanks can change meaning in how that's delivered and the tone that's being used. So paralanguage is a study of nonverbal cues of the voice and various acoustic properties of speech, such as tone, pitch, accent, all of these things collectively known as prosody, can all give off nonverbal cues. It can change the meaning of words. So it can be, that's so bad, to, that's so bad. That's interesting, to, that's interesting. Okay, it's just a mere change in tone, a little bit change in facial expression, and I completely changed the meaning of those two sentences. So it shows how powerful nonverbal communication can be. Lisa?
There was a little note in the chat that my audio seems soft. So I just want to make sure I'll probably just bring myself up a little bit closer and try to be mindful of speaking more, increase the volume of my speech. And just let me know if it's sounding better, if it's about the same, the person who entered that into the chat, if you wouldn't mind. So this slide demonstrates that be mindful that communication, you could break down communication and look at it from several aspects. Context of the situation, communication also can be looked at in clusters, and there's also a congruence element when you have something said and the nonverbal cues that go along with it. The context of the situation, keep in mind that context, I break that down into two things. You look at the context of the situation, and you also look at the context of the cultural context, if there's cultural diversity considerations with the people that you are in the meeting with. Okay, so context of the situation and cultural context is really important to keep in mind. What I mean by clusters is that nonverbal gestures are normally interpreted not independent of one another, but in groups or in clusters. So if you see a combination of gestures, that paints a more accurate picture than just one single nonverbal cue. And regarding congruence, the way to illustrate that concept is perhaps to demonstrate the opposite, or incongruence. Incongruence is when, and we talked about this earlier, is, for example, if somebody says something, but the tone of their voice is very different, of course, you don't have the same messages coming across. So if you have incongruence, if I were to say, I am fine, but I say it in a really kind of sarcastic tone, like I'm angry, then most people will interpret it that the tone of your voice actually would trump or override the actual words spoken. Okay, so just the main tip here regarding congruence is you want to make sure you're aware of not only really what you are doing and not just what you are saying. Okay, and like Anne said before, talking about tone, the tone of our voice changes the meaning of words as it's being received. So we need to be aware of what our body movements and our voice tone are communicating, and not rely solely on expressed words. And doing that is important to express ourselves more authentically, and to also build trust. And we'll talk about tone of voice more as we proceed in the workshop. Okay, next slide.
So be an objective observer. We can't emphasize that enough. As most things related to good communication and people dynamics go, it starts with self-awareness, right? To succeed, you need to be an objective observer of others and of yourself. Pay attention to your own nonverbal cues so you know that you are conveying, and you're being intentional about what you're conveying. You know that you're conveying what you want to mean or emphasize your intentions. Then pay attention to the nonverbal cues of others around you. And make sure, again, that you're acutely aware of who's there and of the meaning that may be derived from their nonverbal cues and what they may be taking from yours. make sure you don't miss anything. We can't emphasize enough that it's the nonverbal cues. Those are probably the most important nuggets of information that you're getting in that communication, more important than the actual words that are being said. So what do you see conveyed in these images? You can enter in chat or just think about it yourself. And in the first image, some of you might recognize that as King Arthur's round table. Okay, there's a reason it was a round table. This has to do with what we talked about earlier, the spatial relationships. A round table conveys equality. So that is nonverbal communication, where people sit at a table, whether you're to the right or left of the host or the chairman of the board, whether you're sitting near a door or a window, all of these things can communicate something. So even being aware of, as we facilitate, when we set up a room, when we enter a room to do a public facilitation, we make sure that the room is set up so everybody participating will feel like they are an equal part of that. If you set it up in a classroom style, the people in the back of the room do not feel like they have the same input as the people in the front of the room. So all of those things, spatial, the attention to the spatial dynamic or spatial recognition is really, really important. You can look at the messy desk on the bottom. Some people may say that conveys genius. Genius, when you see a messy desk, it's a sign of genius, right? Or clutter is a sign of genius, they say. That could also mean I don't care. I'm disorganized. If you're sharing that office with somebody, it may be conveying to them that you are not showing a certain amount of respect for how they manage space or what their concerns might be regarding something that seems disorganized. Okay, so all of these things convey something. And so it's worth paying attention to all of this. Personal space, physical environment, body language, signals coming from body language, and facial expressions. And of course, clothing even can make a statement. As we've all alluded, or at Lisa and I have alluded to already, good communication comes from both an assessment of our own nonverbal cues and a careful look at the cues being shown to us. So our ability to see what is being said has to do with our emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is your ability to acknowledge your own emotions and to recognize emotions in others, and use that information to guide your behavior and improve your social interactions and workplace success. Per the founder of emotional intelligence theory, Daniel Goleman, having command of nonverbal communication, both outwardly and inwardly, is a sign of our emotional intelligence. And most models of EI measure your self-awareness. The number one thing they measure is self-awareness and your social intuition. Social intuition refers to how attuned people are to nonverbal social cues. And this attunement is central both to empathy and compassion. So if you score high on social intuition, you're acutely sensitive to the emotional state of others. If you score low on social intuition, you might have a difficult time reading others' emotions. It can mean a lot toward building trust, and it's entirely reliant on nonverbal cues. I'm going to put a link to this in chat in just a minute, but there is a kind of a fun website to go to. And again, it's just one research take on it, but it's from the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley. And you can do a test. You can take a test on your emotional intelligence and test your social intuition. So I'll put that link in there, and it just gives you a number of facial expressions. These are samples taken from the website, and it shows the slight, and again, this is in the experience that Lisa and I work in, which is in Western, this is all based on Western understanding of body language. That, slight tilt of the head can change meaning. Certainly our eyes can carry a lot of meaning in communication. Just slight little contractions of muscles in the face can change between a frown to disappointment to misunderstanding. So it's these subtle little facial movements and muscle movements that can change meaning entirely. And you can go to the website. I'll put the link in chat in just a second, and you can take the test yourself and see how you do. How you read what your test or what your social intuition test scores might be. All right. So And this, as any of you, any mediators here or facilitators here know what active listening is. And of course, all of this is really important. Active listening is not just what you're saying, as we all know, that's a small part of it, but it comes from really watching and paying attention to understand meaning. All right, so as I put the link in there, I'm going to turn this over to Lisa, and this is sort of like the point in The Sound of Music where Julie Andrews is teaching the Von Trapp family children how to sing, and after she starts explaining music theory, she stops and she says, let me just make this a little bit easier, and then she breaks into do, re, mi. So we're not going to break into do, re, mi, but we're going to break into meta, and I'm going to let Lisa tell you what that is.
Okay, thanks, Anne. Okay, so before I describe meta, I just wanted to put a little more context on here. We wanted to provide this framework, this meta framework, to give you some kind of like a checklist, a nonverbal cues checklist for some specific circumstances. And by way of example, using meta can help you prepare for meetings or mediation or facilitation. It could also help you in observing others while you're interacting with them to make sure you're getting the full message, and for you to do a self-check to make sure you're sending appropriate signals to effectively express yourself and convey your intended message. So this meta model we found, and it was developed by Dr. Jeff Thompson, and he conducted research on nonverbal communication, and it was based on his experiences working in New York City as a detective and former crisis and hostage negotiator. Okay, so keep in mind that meta, it was developed in more of a Western cultural context. Okay, so we just wanted to put that out there. So possible cultural nuances, you're going to want to take the meta model, and we'll go through each one of these letters, the M, the E, the TT, and the A. Talk about some possible cultural nuances that you want to consider. Okay. Also keep in mind that meta was developed prior to COVID-19. So it really was looking at in-person communications. We are going to be doing some breakout exercises where we're going to be talking about, well, how do we make ourselves more effective communicators using nonverbal cues in an online setting? Because it's just not so obvious. You might have some visual cues from, probably from about the shoulders up and maybe the use of some of your hands, but what are some other ways that you can communicate nonverbally in an online setting to build rapport, to make people feel comfortable? Okay. I think that is most of that on that slide.
Okay, and we'll help. Mae West is going to help us introduce the M in movement, which of course includes all body movement like posture, facial expressions, and hand gestures. Lisa?
Okay, so the M for meta, again, it's the movement of your body, facial expressions. It could also include your hands, just parts of your body that when you're in meeting and you're communicating with somebody, that part of your body is being seen by others. Okay, so of course your head and face gestures are probably the most obvious from the neck up. Your eye contact or lack of eye contact. One thing that is very interesting in an online setting is I like to look at all the boxes, to look at all your faces, but by doing that, I'm not really giving you direct eye contact. I'm giving direct eye contact when I actually look into my camera, and then I can't really see you other than in my periphery. So it's just a little bit different. The nuances in online meetings is different, is really quite different than in in-person settings. So your hand and face gestures are very important and very key. Gestures of your fingers, hands, arms, legs, and feet. Important things to be aware of, and especially be aware and be mindful that appropriate gestures may vary by culture. Again, we bring it back to cultural context. I'm going to just show you 3 examples, and after I give you show the 3 examples, I invite you to enter into chat any type of gestures that you can think of that might be interpreted differently based on different cultures. So the first gesture I have is the okay sign. Okay, I'm okay. This gesture can actually be interpreted as derogatory or obscene in countries such as Argentina, Brazil, Germany, Greece, Italy, Paraguay, Russia, Singapore, Spain, and Tunisia. I mean, those are a lot of countries. So you might want to be careful in using that hand gesture, because if you don't know your audience real well, you might end up offending some of them. Okay. Another gesture is the thumbs up. We were talking about that. It's a really popular emoji, right? And so in US culture, that means good. That means right on. In Iraq or Iran, however, this can be very insulting. It could mean, go, what, go, shove it, where. So you might want to avoid, again, know your audience, know who you're communicating with, and maybe the thumbs up emoji might not be the most appropriate, based on the cultural backgrounds of those you're communicating with. Another example is the peace sign. Okay, in US culture, this stands for victory. In American Sign Language, it's the sign for the number 2. In some Asian countries, China, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Thailand, people go like this when they pose for pictures. It's kind of cute. In the United Kingdom, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and Ireland, if you take the peace symbol and turn it the other direction, this could be seen as an insult. So again, you want to know the cultural diversity and background of people that you're communicating with, and just make sure that the gestures you're using are intended to hopefully build a more comfortable environment around you, and not, in an environment where people are feeling offended and feeling like you didn't do your homework. Oh, okay. So I wanted to see what comments we have in chat here.
I see David Donahue says that the first hand gesture she used could also be used in ASL as either a 9 or an F. So that's another thing that we haven't even touched on yet, but sign language gives a whole new meaning to this. Thank you for that comment.
Can I invite people now to enter into chat any other hand gestures, gestures with the fingers, hands, arms, that could be, seen differently. What we got here? And of course, the pointing of the finger. Yes, that is, that could be seen as aggressive. But some people like to point, or they just tend to, right, in order to convey their message more effectively, they might feel like they need to, point directly at the board, the chalkboard or the whiteboard. Rock on can be seen differently. Okay, that's a good point. Any other people? Any other ideas? Yeah, and then even some of the I'm just trying, shaka. There's certain hand gestures that if you just move one finger in a different place, it could be interpreted very differently. So yeah, to do certain hand gestures, you want to just be really mindful and careful about what you're doing. In fact, I even heard something that during President Obama's inauguration back in, was that in 2009, that he gave the shaka, and non-Hawaii people thought he was doing something weird. They didn't understand that gesture. Let's see, what else do we have here? The modified shaka. Okay. I'm just curious. Maybe at the end of this, I want to find out what the modified shaka looks like. Waving the hand in the come here motion. Good. In some cultures, it's offensive to look into the eyes of the person. Yeah. I mean, eye contact. We'll talk about that. That is, in meta, we're going to be talking more. Again, it's more in a Western context, but in delivering messages as a speaker, I tend to try to use eye contact. But if I'm not getting eye contact back from people I'm communicating to, I shouldn't necessarily think that there's anything wrong. That just could be the way they in their culture communicate. It's a very good point. Use of the middle. Okay, yes. That's a very good point. That you wouldn't want to use your middle finger in quite a few cultures, but yeah, maybe some just they won't be offended at all. Good points.
I like the it's considered disrespectful to shake hands with your left hand in India. And and whoever put that message, Will, I don't know if you want to open up. I don't see you right away, but if you want to open your mic and explain why that is. I hate to, you don't, I see you with Epic, Will. Shake your head no if you don't want to, or yes if you do. Go ahead and, oh, there you go. Go ahead.
When I went to India, that was a very new experience for me. But apparently, you eat with your right hand and you wipe with your left. So
I've heard that.
when I was shaking hands with people, I was doing it with my left, and they would like give me dirty looks, and I didn't understand what was happening. So yeah, it's learning those kind of signals.
Mhm.
So Will didn't get invited to many dinner parties while
Yeah.
he was in India. Thank you for that, Will. Okay, shall we move on, Lisa?
Okay.
Thank you for the wonderful input, everybody. We appreciate that. And we will be sending the chat along with the follow-up with the PowerPoint slides. So if any of you want more of these notes, you don't have to worry about writing them down now or copying and pasting. We'll send the chat after, all right?
Yeah, so good input, right? The bottom line is you just want to be really mindful. If you know you use gestures, just be aware, and also just try to avoid fidgeting with your fingers and doing all that kind of stuff. We're going to repeat that several times in this workshop. That's distracting. So if you know you're a fidgeter, just try your best to try to keep your hands. I don't know, try sitting on your hands. I don't know. I could do that online. You guys can't necessarily see me. Maybe in an in-person meeting, if you sit on your hands, people might kind of look at you a little bit strange. But just be aware of your not only what you're doing with your eyes and your face, your hands. I'd say everything from probably about the waist up, especially be mindful of what you're doing. Okay, go ahead, Anne.
So when we started talking about first impressions in the beginning here, things like trustworthiness and even attractiveness are highly dependent on first impressions. Much of that nonverbal conversation comes from body movement, including posture and facial expressions. In fact, Miss Wen, who we cited earlier, got her information from a gentleman named Dr. Alexander Todorov of Princeton University's Neuroscience Institute. And he explores this phenomenon in his book, Face Value, The Irresistible Influence of First Impressions. We make judgments about people before they open their mouths all the time without realizing it. How often have you heard someone say, he or she doesn't look presidential? Studies show that facial appearances can be used to predict the outcome of elections to the US Senate and in Bulgarian, French, Mexican, and even Brazilian elections as well. How people carry themselves and facial expressions sway how we hire, who we choose to ask for directions, and who we gravitate to in a room full of people. In mediation or in other problem-solving processes, the non-speech elements in the first 5 minutes of your encounter with parties will significantly set the tone for all future interactions. So that's how important first impressions are. So take a few deep breaths before you enter the room and be ready for it. Here's another reminder of how important it is to self-reflect and practice using more positive, appropriate nonverbal communication cues. And if you take a look at just some of the images here, we trust our eyes more than our ears. And it's really because of the nonverbal cues that are given here. These people don't have to speak, and they've already made it, right or wrong, they've already made an impression on us, and we are making an impression on them at the same time. Lisa?
Okay, a little bit more about body movements and gestures and whatnot. We call these body movements to consider. You want to, always look at things within, contextually and within a cultural context. So you may want to consider either avoiding or reducing these kinds of movements if it seems culturally or contextually appropriate. So we talked a little bit about eye contact, and eye contact norms do vary by culture. In Western culture, again, trying to put in Western culture, one would try to avoid little eye contact if possible. If I'm trying to communicate effectively, I actually want to provide good eye contact. So the reverse of that is try to reduce the use of little eye contact. Some of these other tips here, closed gestures crossed arms or a closed fist, those kinds of, we'll talk a little bit more about crossed arms in a few minutes, but in general, first impression of crossed arms may be interpreted that I am closed off to you. I might not be interested in a whole lot interested in what you have to say. But we'll go into the nuances and go into that a little bit further. And again, we also have to look at the cultural nuances. Okay, avoid resting your head in your hand. You may appear to be uninterested in what the person's having to say. Again, we always say try to avoid fidgeting. The nervous energy. Hopefully you've grounded yourself before you've started the meeting, so you don't start, wiggling around. If you find yourself wiggling around, maybe that would be a time, if you're the facilitator, if you're the person holding the meeting, it might be, maybe other people are also feeling a little bit antsy and it might be time to take a break. So, read yourself, be aware of yourself, be aware of others. If it seems real clear that people are fidgeting and may not be paying that good attention, and you've already been in the meeting for an hour, then that might be a good time to take a break. Let's see, if we talked about incongruence, avoid employing body gestures that contradict verbal messages. And we talked about pointing, using finger pointing. That could be assertive. Again, you have to look at things contextually, but it could be considered assertive or packed with baggage. Okay. Next slide.
Dick, thank you for the comment on open with a smile. That goes a long way. A smile goes a long way.
Yes, we are going to get there. We're going to get to facial expressions. Thanks, Dick. So these are things that we recommend that you do more of. Again, within a Western cultural context, you want to model appropriate nonverbal communication. So eye contact, it's very inviting. People feel that you're really paying attention, and the focus is on that, on your audience and on that person. You want to use open palm and open-handed gestures. When you say yes, also nod to reinforce your message. You want to situate your body to face all participants rather than only facing one person or not facing them at all, your audience at all. You also want to adopt an aligned posture, leaning in slightly into the conversation if possible. Leaning in conveys that you are interested, you're paying attention, the people that you're communicating with, that they matter. Okay. Let's see here. A little bit more notes on posture. Yeah, sitting up straight, leading in a little bit. Another idea of relating to body posture is mirroring. We'll talk about that a little bit more also. Mirroring means two people are sitting or have adopted the same posture when they're in a meeting, when they're sitting with one another. So like if one person is like this, the other person is listening to and is doing the same thing. That's showing a connection that you're paying enough attention to each other to model each other's behaviors and gestures. Okay, mirroring helps lead to more favorable outcomes. It's showing empathy because you're assuming the posture of the person you're speaking with. That demonstrates a strong degree of understanding. It helps build trust and rapport. Okay, next slide, Anne.
Okay, so here are a couple things to avoid. I know I'm guilty of these and I have to really be mindful of myself. The perpetual nod. Okay, that often shows signs of nervousness. It can be interpreted or misinterpreted as affirmation of something's being said. In mediation, you want to be careful of that. You don't want to show any bias toward anybody or to either party. So make sure that you're not nodding all the time and doing this. A lot of us feel like we need to do this because it shows that we're listening. Just be mindful of how much you're doing it, perhaps, and be judicious about how you do apply the nod. Okay. You might be making other people nervous too, especially with perpetual blinking. I watched myself on a think tech interview. I won't give you the link or anything because I don't want anybody to see it. I blinked like this most of the time I was giving it, and it was it made me nervous to watch myself. So I've been very mindful of that. Too much blinking. Sometimes maybe you have dry eyes, bring eye drops. But it can show a sign of nervousness, and it can make other people uncomfortable as well.
Okay, and here is another tip that can help boost your social intuition score. In this slide, what do you see? You can go ahead and enter into chat. See the three people in the slide, what's being conveyed and what they are doing with their hands. The power pose, thinking. Waiting, thinking. Okay, well, and did some research, and he found that this hand gesture is called steepling. And so it's basically within a Western context, when you learned how to make a steeple in a Western context, you put your fingers together and you kind of separate your palms a little bit apart from one another, and it would again resemble a Western style church steeple. Doing this is a way to communicate confidence, strength, some deep thoughts. I saw the comments about deep thoughts or thinking. It also communicates confidence, strength, and power, but yet it's subtle. It's not like pointing that could be interpreted much more aggressively. This is subtle. So if you haven't tried it yet, if it's not part of your gestures repertoire, I invite you to try it. See if you're comfortable using that. Give it a try. That one, I think I'm not aware of that this could be interpreted as an insult, but I cannot say that I know that I know enough about hand gestures and all within the context of all cultures that it wouldn't be considered negatively. But it probably, I just think that it's likely not to be viewed. I'm not aware that this could be interpreted offensively or as an insult. So
I think the research pretty much said that universally this is mostly interpreted as confidence. So it shows it and it does it shows a thoughtful posture. You might be thinking, it might have some pensive connotation to it, but it shows confidence. So it's not a lost kind of thinking. It's that I'm going to think through this, and it does connotate a certain degree of power. The person in charge is often the one that would be making that move.
Okay.
Okay. Crossed arms is another one to consider, and this is kind of interesting. So just let's take a look at the first picture here, the gentleman with the glasses. Does anybody want to just put in chat what is being conveyed by the crossed arms in the first gentleman? Comfortable, confident, good. Oh, somebody says closed. Okay, again, see, subject to the other person in the conversation. Skeptical. Somebody said guarding, I think. Closed off. Okay, what about picture number 2? What do we see with the little girl? Waiting. Comfort. Frustrated, bored, upset. Slightly upset. Okay, see, everybody's interpreting it differently. I think that's the most interesting thing that you can take away, is even just in this group of 100 people, how much or how many different ways this is being interpreted. So let's just jump down to the one in the lower corner, the gentleman with the dark background and the palm tree on his shirt. Aggressive. Mm-hmm. Don't mess with him. I wouldn't.
So hard.
So hard. This is excellent. Leave me alone, I see. Okay, so I think there's a sort of this, somebody says confident. Generally, it's a standoffish. He wants you to kind of stay away. Like all of you, I don't know the precise answer, since I can only guess without the context, but often people say, like you have, that it could be shutting people out. It can be closed-mindedness. It can demonstrate anger. And that came up quite a bit today. People who study body language actually say it's more of a sign that someone wants assurance. So I think that's interesting. It's almost opposite of what we think. Somebody who crosses their arms, and I'm going to kind of be extreme about it so you can see it, is often giving themselves a self-hug. It's giving your sense a bit of security. Okay, so I think that's kind of interesting because it's counter to what we usually think, and that's to shut someone out or to keep somebody away. It's actually saying, I need some reassurance. So it's something to think about when you see somebody with crossed arms. Why is it that they might be feeling insecure? Why is it that they need that self-hug right now? Because instead of taking a defensive posture, it sort of puts you more into an empathic or possibly a sympathetic posture. Okay, so remember, crossed arms can be a sign of confidence. It can be a sign of certainty that I'm good with who I am, and I'm going to give myself a hug for that. Or it can be conveying a sense of insecurity, and you're protecting your vulnerable posture. You're protecting vulnerabilities in general. Okay, so I think that's kind of interesting. I don't think I need to say more about that. Is there anything you want to add to that, Lisa?
Yes.
Other than that, it's just really important to understand and to pay attention to the context and what might really be said. This is a good example of what's not being said, maybe the most important piece of information. Go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah. Well, there was Bruce in the chat said he thinks it's the crossed arms plus facial expressions that helps convey the message. So you also look at the face, you know, what's going on in the, the face area.
Absolutely.
That's going to give you much more clues here on possibly what, where this person is.
Absolutely. All of the parts matter here. Bruce, thank you for that.
Yes.
Okay, so this is just an interesting quote. Mr. Wittgenstein was an Austrian-British philosopher who worked primarily in logic, the philosophy of mathematics, the philosophy of mind, and the philosophy of language. He taught at Cambridge University from 1929 to 1947. I think that's very thoughtful.
Okay, we're on to facial expressions, and I saw Dick Mosier had Dick Mosier jumped ahead of me. We're on just the first part, the M of meta, and he jumped into start out with a smile and know your physical space and all that. So, or be mindful for people's space. We're getting there, Dick. So on to this slide on facial expressions. Obviously, facial expressions are a very, very powerful component of communication. Not only does it convey our emotional state of who we are to our observers, but facial expressions are a primary means of conveying social information amongst humans. Okay, it's also true for most other mammals, actually, and other animal species. Facial expressions are often involuntary. However, we can make efforts to control our facial expressions better. So this is empowering. This is an empowering tip to share. It has been observed that voluntarily assuming an expression can actually cause the associated emotion. So, entering into, a meeting that may be contentious, entering in with a smile, putting on that smile on your face might be able to bring the room into a more positive setting from the outset. Okay, so even when you're not in the best of mood, just trying to put on that smile, it couldn't hurt. You want to balance it with also being authentic. You don't want to just make it look so fake that people aren't going to believe it at all. And we're going to get a little bit further into towards later on in the workshop, preparing yourself and practicing these nonverbal cues and practicing and being prepared will make you a more authentic communicator. But just wanted to show that facial expressions obviously very, very key. To the extent you can smile, with a warm-hearted smile could never hurt. Okay.
And again, Lisa, you mentioned being prepared. If you don't feel it's going to be authentic, walking in a room with a smile, you can change your mood by taking a walk around the block before you enter the room, or going into the you know, the bathroom and looking at the funny photo you have on your phone or whatever, to just to make yourself smile. If that can change your emotion, think how powerful that is. It will actually change your approach to going into the room, to force that smile before you enter.
Thanks for those comments, Anne. Okay, so we're going to move on to the E part of meta, which is the environment. Dr. Thompson was referring to the physical environment, but you know, we're going to be doing a little nuancing and talk about online settings and remote settings, and how environment, how do we create a nurturing, constructive, safe environment in an online setting. So with regards to a physical setting, the goal, of course, is to help the participants feel comfortable, help establish open minds, for people to be more at ease, basically, to share information and ideas, especially if they're going to be negotiating in the meeting. You want them to feel comfortable, so they feel safe. Okay, some common courtesies and focus. You want to turn off your cell phone, close your laptops, devices that are not part of the remote meeting. Again, it's you're showing by putting those devices away that you really are paying attention. Okay, the room layout when you're meeting in person is important. We already showed the round table. Setting up chairs, maybe in a circle or a semicircle, so everybody can see one another, is important. Having a clean environment, you know, clean windows, those kinds of things. Just be mindful of those kinds of details. Providing light refreshments if you're meeting in person. You know, you want to avoid the situation where you've got a bunch of people who are hangry. If you're hangry, you're not going to be in the best mood. You'll be distracted. You might not be paying good attention, and you might not be in the mood to be able to contribute constructively. Okay. Also, ADA considerations if you are hosting a in-person meeting. Okay. Yeah. So just the big picture. Idea with this slide is helping achieve the most comfort possible during your meetings is really important. Okay, next slide.
Okay, well, we are on to a breakout room, and we'll do the breakout room first, and then we'll take a pause from the PowerPoint just to see if there's anything critical that needs to be addressed, or any ideas that you have that you want to share right away. So this first breakout room, this discovery session, we'll call it, we want you to discuss with some of your colleagues how you create a comfortable environment in a remote setting. Okay, because nonverbal communications, we think it can apply only to physical settings, but certainly it applies to the online setting. And there are ways that there's technology, there are different tricks that we have available to us through technology. And those of you who are familiar with Zoom or Google Meet, or you know, any of the WebEx, any of the platforms that are available, probably have some tricks up your sleeve. And I think it'd be great if we could all share those. So we're going to break out, and we're going to have you talk about what the physical setting is, and I want you to look at some of the things we have here, and then how does that translate to a remote setting. So in the physical setting, one of the courtesies we might suggest is to turn off devices. That's how we're going to make people feel comfortable. What does that look like in the remote setting? For room layout, in the physical setting, we might have a round table, or we might set a room of chairs in a circle. What does that look like in a remote setting? How would you get the same results that you're looking for, that of equality, in a remote setting? In the physical setting, you might clean the environment. You might make sure the room is set up nicely. You might make sure the windows are open and you've got good light coming in. How do you do that in a remote setting? And then for accommodations, of course, in Hawaii, we always have food if we have a meeting, right? If I have a mediation and it's live, I have M&Ms or snack bars on the table. What does that look like in a remote setting? How do you make that same gesture in a remote setting? Okay, so those are the areas: the courtesies, room layout, physical setting, accommodations. So we're going to send you to breakout rooms, hopefully successfully, and we're going to give you 10 minutes to talk about that. Okay, so let me see. Okay, everything should be ready to go, and we'll see you in about 10 minutes. All right. Welcome back.
Hey.
So I hope you saw my note. I neglected to read the ground rules. Oh, Lisa, I lost you here. Lisa got put into a breakout room.
Oh yeah, I had a nice chat
There you
with
are. Good,
Sylvia.
good. I'm glad. No, I'm glad you did. I just couldn't see you pop up back on the screen here. So welcome back, everybody. I hope you had enough time to get some good discussion in there and share some ideas. I hope you saw my note. I neglected to read the ground rules, and one of them was to assign a scribe. So go ahead, scribes, or if you did not see the note, just somebody enter for your group some of the highlights that you thought were good ideas on creating a comfortable environment in a remote setting, because it's really mostly nonverbal, right? So go ahead and enter in chat some of your ideas. Turn on camera, put yourself on mute, arrange for childcare. I like that ahead of time. That actually is a very good point to make sure that you can stay focused.
Oh, make sure backgrounds aren't cluttered. Yeah, I even have a anecdote that one person was feeling uncomfortable turning her video on because she felt like her background was cluttered. And so, but hadn't explained that to her manager. Her manager was wondering how come she didn't want to be seen. But once she did explain that, then the manager understood. But
I like this idea too about using standard backgrounds. I think that's it sort of levels the playing field, right? If everybody uses a standard background, agreeing to aloha etiquette, telling everyone to bring their favorite coffee or snack. I like that idea too. You can share snacks. I've even heard of people having dinner parties and wine tastings on Zoom. So why not have a snack during a meeting? I've even heard of people, Lisa Nakau's here, she could probably attest to it. I think she's the one that did it, actually sending snacks to people's homes in preparation for the meeting. So everybody's got something available to them during the meeting. I think that's a wonderful, very Hawaii centric idea, isn't it?
yes, Stacy also put that in chat, the proactive sending out a box of snacks.
The hosting having a lot of responsibility and talking about what to expect from technology perspective. The host does need to do that. They need to lay expectations properly. I hope that's what you meant, Karen.
Okay, pizza delivery. I'm getting hungry now.
I know, me too. Making all participants visible on screen. You know, it is a limitation of Zoom, and it can be a problem when you have more than, I think, the 42 or something that you can get on one screen at a time. And so how can you expand that? What can you do about that? That's an interesting dilemma that you can have if people are on screen on page 2 or 3 or 4. Do they feel like they're in the back of the room? So.
Yes.
Do you think some people may feel uncomfortable watching other people eat or less able to concentrate?
Well, you can ask, and you can make sure that that's something ahead of time in preparation for the meeting. You know, if you think that that might be an issue, ask and say, would everybody be comfortable if we all brought snacks? And, you know, kind of get a feel for it before you go to the meeting.
Yeah, maybe it's getting the permission, just saying if and it applies to everybody. It's just that if it's snacks, then everybody, you know, just be mindful, you know, please bring a snack, or if you don't have a snack, other people may be eating, and that's okay. Yeah, some feedback from our group. Just allotting a few minutes before the meeting starts and a few minutes after it ends so people can settle in and have their little chit chat before and after the meeting. Also providing, having soothing background, virtual backgrounds, and also just reducing background noise. So, you know, not washing your, you know, having the washer dryer going during the meeting, hopefully avoiding the barking dog, those types of things to minimize the auditory distractions.
I like this too about doing introductions, especially if you have someone new joining your meeting. That's important. We do that in real life, and I think when people pop into Zoom, we tend to not be so focused on that. But when somebody walks in a room, the courteous thing to do is to introduce them and make sure that everybody's comfortable, that they're comfortable, they know who's there, and that everybody knows that they've entered the room. I think that's very important. Thank you for bringing that up. And Robert, having something kind of fun, an icebreaker. Icebreakers are kind of tricky. I've had good and bad experience with icebreakers, and somebody brings up that, Robert had his parrot in the room, and that is a bit of an icebreaker, right? It's kind of a conversation starter. It gets people to be a little bit comfortable. And that brings to mind something that somebody taught to me, and because I used to open my meetings right on the hour when they were supposed to start. And somebody else, a friend of mine said, I open my meetings ahead of time. I just leave, I don't have waiting rooms. I just let people come in because I want them to see each other, get to know who's there, talk to each other. And I thought, that's a great idea. That's why when I have you come in early, I just open the room for everybody to get a chance to get to know each other. I think that's just, it adds a level of comfort, and you can say hello to old friends. The virtual backgrounds are something to consider. Some of the virtual backgrounds can be distracting. Sometimes we're looking at people's family photos and all kinds of things in there. A friend of mine pointed out some signage I had behind my desk that, it's funny to me, but may come off as being snarky to somebody else. It's really important to pay attention to your own background in reality, or if you're putting a virtual background in place, the kind of message that you're sending. Interpreters, yes, thank you. Accommodating people with disabilities, interpreters for people who have English as a second language, very important. Okay, there's a lot of good ideas here. I think we could go on probably for the next 20 minutes just reading some of these great ideas, but once again, we are going to send this chat to everybody so you'll have some of these ideas captured for your use, okay? Thank you. Thank you for those ideas. I'm going to go back to sharing now, and we will continue. Let's see. Okay, thumbs up, everybody, if you are seeing the PowerPoint. Yes? Excellent. Good. Okay, Lisa is going to now move us to the T, touch, in Meta.
First T of Meta, touch. And keep in mind, touch, it's highly contextual. The Meta model was based on in-person, meetings within a Western cultural context. So highly contextual. Keep in mind, be very mindful of the time, the place, who your participants are, and what their various cultural backgrounds are, okay? So under kind of under Western norms, and this is under pre-COVID and mostly not at work, oftentimes extending your hand and offering a firm handshake signals that you're welcoming the participants into the room, and it's displaying confidence and assertive and a friendly assertiveness. Okay, hugs in Hawaii amongst vaccinated friends and family be considered not only appropriate but perhaps expected. And I see here, but probably not in Michigan.
That's my note.
Right. So it's not always, a hug might not always be the most appropriate way to greet somebody. But in Hawaii, again, if you're vaccinated and when it's among friends and family, it's the norm, and it might even be expected. Okay, shoulders and arm pats and high fives, especially amongst like younger people. That's the common way that they're going to be meeting and greeting one another. Compare that to maybe more of an East Asian context, perhaps a bow. perhaps respecting the physical space. Dick mentioned that earlier. Respecting the physical space of others is important. So within the East Asian context, perhaps a bow rather than physical touching, especially if you don't know somebody yet. That might be more appropriate. And then just the one tip we could probably say universally is avoid playing, and we're not talking about touching another person, you know, touching their shoulder or their hand, but, you know, avoid playing with, you know, twirling the pen. This is touching other objects while you are communicating or while you are listening. If you're twirling your pen and somebody's talking, it really looks like you're not listening at all. So you want to avoid the distracting touching of objects and, you know, your hair, your jewelry, and all that kind of stuff. Try to avoid that if all possible. And I think that's probably a universal principle that we can apply within all cultural contexts. Okay.
And just so people don't think people in Michigan are entirely cold, I added that because of some experience I had pre-COVID when I went to visit my parents. My mom introduced me to the director of the independent living residence they live in, and she's been so helpful to my mom. I just gave her a hug. It was just, I've been in Hawaii for 20 years. That's just what you do when you meet somebody new who you really appreciate. And she stood back with sort of a shocked look on her face. And I had to remember where I was.
Like,
you're
like
not,
this, right? You're
yeah.
kind of hugging and they're kind of like, oh.
I had that Dorothy, you're not in Kansas anymore moment. So
okay, so now we are on to the second T of metta, is tone of voice. And like I'd mentioned earlier, that is a pretty, your voice is quite a large aspect of nonverbal communication. I think it was 38% of what you're communicating is based on your tone of voice. So it is an important element to consider. Again, it's contextual. And so, you know, we're talking about this within the Western context. So again, be mindful about, especially when you are listening to others speak. If they speak differently than how you speak, it doesn't necessarily mean, I wouldn't judge it one way or another. You just want to just have an understanding of where they're coming from. And if you need clarification, I wouldn't hesitate to ask for that clarification. Being the communicator, within a Western context, I try to be mindful of the tone of my voice. I try to keep my pitch relatively low and speak deliberately with warmth. Again, that's modeling a positive tone. Also, when applicable, give it a shot. Try ending your sentences with a slight downward inflection that displays strength and groundedness, rather than ending my sentence like this. I try to end my sentences like this. Okay. Also know what you're planning on saying well in advance to try to reduce the use of ums. And I know I'm bad. A lot of people just are. It's just the way to fill the space. We're not real comfortable with silence. And so a lot of us have to work on that. I know I have to work on that also. Having an outline and taking or talking points or something ahead of time and practicing helps reduce the use of or overuse of ums. Okay. And again, the manner of speaking may vary by culture.
Do you want to demonstrate the tone of voice, Lisa?
Let's see. I just did an there.
How are you, Lisa? Are you ready for the meeting?
Okay, so we're going to compare, right? Sure, I'm ready for the meeting. Ask me again.
Yeah, you don't sound very ready for the meeting, but okay, she said she was ready for the meeting. So let's try this again. How are you, Lisa? Are you ready for the meeting?
Sure, I'm ready for the meeting.
Okay, two very different things, and it was just tone, just tone. Okay. All right. Appearance. Here we're to the A in metta. And what you wear matters. You really, you know, I'm just going to tell a quick story on this. I was facilitating the Kahikili Highway project several years ago. And there were many diverse groups there. There was the Hawaiian community was represented. The Keep the Country community was represented. A lot of residents from various different areas in the region were there. The meeting was just full of people with, coming from very different backgrounds, coming with very different ideas on the usefulness or not of this ramp for the Kahikili Highway. And I was assigned a breakout group, and one of the loudest, probably one of the more angry participants in this community meeting was assigned to my group. And I was ready. I was ready to facilitate this group, and I was dressed professionally. I had my best, black dress that just makes me look serious and professional, and people were going to respect me in front of the room. And I was up there introducing the first question, and we were going to go around the table, and everybody was giving input. And as we got to the vociferous gentleman in the group, I was ready to bust out all my facilitator moves and just gently move toward him as he was talking louder and more assertively, to just kind of temper it and be ready to move to the next person. And he put his hand up in front of me just like this, and he said, "You in the black dress, stop right there." I, of course, was stunned, because I'm thinking, I thought this was a good choice of dress. My mother would have been proud of me. It was not the right choice to wear to this community meeting. I would have been better off in a mu'umu'u, or I would have been better off with an aloha short, or just something a little bit more comfortable and casual than my professional black dress that would have been perfect in a conference room in Detroit, but not so much here. So I learned a quick lesson there. And what you wear does matter. It really does make a statement. So it's important to, if you're facilitating or mediating, if you're representing the judiciary, if you're representing the Mediation Center, you want to dress, be clean and professional. But this is a perfect example of pay attention who's going to be at the meeting. Who's going to be there? Know your audience. Is aloha wear better than a suit in this case? You want to be tasteful within the context of the dialogue that you're going to be facilitating. And here are some good examples. Here's our governor he's got a variety of choices of what to wear, and you can bet each one is for a very specific kind of address that he's going to be making, or the audience that he's meeting. So knowing your audience and what you want to convey, consider what, how you're presenting yourself. It will matter. So just a further consideration to remote settings, since we had that breakout session to talk about some spatial relationships, other nonverbal cues that you can recreate in a remote setting. Here are some ideas that we had that can help you just with how you present yourself and how you are, your appearance, or how you are addressing the group. And one of them is to adjust your camera to make best use of your periphery vision. So I can see what's going on, I've got my studio computer set up so I can see the whole group at the time. I can read from my notes, but I can still address you directly in the camera like this. And it feels very different than if I'm looking down here or if I'm looking over at the screen. So if I'm looking directly at you, if you can see me in speaker view right now, you can see, and I'll demonstrate this again when we're back in the full group, but it makes a difference if I'm looking right at you versus looking from side to side or looking down and reading off of my lap. Okay, so adjust your camera so you can make best use of it. And again, looking directly into the camera to make critical points or showing a deeper level of engagement. I know many people that put Post-it notes up next to their camera that says, "Don't forget to smile." I have one on my board right behind the camera that I'm looking at that says, "Don't blink too much." So you can put subtle reminders that can help you. Using hand gestures, if you're going to use hand gestures, if I want to convey something to you, if I want to thank you and I want to use hand gestures to do that, if I want to show that I'm being pensive or thinking about something, make sure that your hand gestures are visible in the camera, or adjust your camera if you're going to make use of the rest of your body, because otherwise it's not going to be seen and you're just going to look like you're jumping around like this. Okay. Pose a couple of yes or no questions once in a while just to get feedback from people. So can everybody see the PowerPoint? I want to see some nods, just to see the level of engagement. Or is nobody hearing you? Or is there no response for some other reason that you're not aware of? It's just a way to check in once in a while. Simple yes or no questions can generate nods either way, and you can just kind of test the level of involvement. Okay. We ask people, Lisa, I'm saying we, meaning Lisa and I, because we agree on this, that we like to ask people to keep their videos on as much as possible. That's how important your nonverbal communication is to us. When we can see you, if I see somebody with a puzzled look, or if I see a lot of people with a furrow in their brow, I know I'm missing the mark. Or if I, see cameras going off, or, things happening, I need to pay attention to what's going on. So keeping the videos on is very helpful. And so we do request that when we teach. And we are also respectful of that and try to keep our videos on as much as possible when we are attending or we're participating in workshops, because we know the value of that. Okay, Lisa, do you have anything more before we go into our next breakout?
I just wanted to tell a little story, going back to appearance.
Right, thank you. Sorry about that. Yes, go back and.
Oh yeah. So my sister, who she's actually a cosmetic surgeon in Southern California. And so when COVID happened, her practice actually first, she lost business in the first couple of months, but when Zoom meetings actually grew and grew and grew, and people spent hours on end a day at Zoom meetings and looking at themselves in the mirror, at their screen, they said, gosh, I think I need a little work here and there. So actually her business expanded after a couple of months of a dip. It actually grew quite a bit. So just another thing showing that online that we're seeing, if you have your video on, you get to look at yourself quite often throughout the day.
And that can be good and bad. It certainly is good at seeing how you present yourself and what the message that you're sending with your nonverbal communication, right? Your movements, your gestures, your facial expressions. Mm-hmm. Thank you. So we're going to move to another breakout room. I'm going to quickly go over the ground rules this time. This one, we're going to talk about how do you build rapport in a virtual setting? How do you show empathy? How do you show compassion? What does a virtual handshake or a high five or a pat on the back look like in a virtual setting? So before we break out, remember, as soon as you get to the breakout room, assign a scribe, somebody just to take notes that can post some of the ideas into the chat when we get back. Make sure that everybody has a chance to speak. Be mindful of time. Stay focused on the topic. Come back, everybody. So again, we're going to ask the scribe, and if anybody feels missed or that they weren't heard, to enter your thoughts into the chat box. Let's hear from all of you on some of the ways you can build rapport in a virtual setting.
Okay, so we've got a show hand gestures.
Using
like
all these.
Clapping, using the Zoom reactions, moving closer to the camera or standing up to show excitement, maintaining a straight face. But what do you do? Whoops. What do you do? There's
Tone of voice. Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. Important here.
Modulate tone. Build rapport, jokes, introductions, empathy, tone. Positive feedback.
I'd like to hear more about answering the questions live as much as possible. If I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you want to unmute yourself and share a little bit more about answering the questions live, I'd like to hear more about that.
Yeah, so in our group, we talked about like how some people can get very frustrated when you give them the answer of, oh, well, I'm gonna have to get back to you. We're gonna just put your email and stuff in the chat, and then we'll have to get back to you. We have to check on a few things. I think that people feel more heard. They maybe might feel like you're really trying to listen to them if you're doing your best to really take care and answer the question like right then and there. Especially with the meetings that we have, we believe in, transparency. And so when families, have their questions answered in the meeting and are not told, okay, well, we're going to have to, just put that on the side and we'll come back to that later. You know, it can get really hard for them to feel like they're being heard, because a lot
That's
of
a
these
very good
families
point,
look for
Charlotte.
the
Yeah,
answers.
very good point. So just trying to keep it as real time as possible, and not marginalizing somebody by saying, we'll get back to that. Is that what you're saying, Charlotte? It's just that feeling that it's
Yeah.
it's a valuable question that you have, and it's worth taking the time.
Yeah.
Very good point. Again, timing is everything. Making jokes, smiling, facial expressions, all of these great nonverbal cues. Another one being mindful of facial expressions, setting the camera on eye level. That's an important tip, and thank you for that tip, who did that, because otherwise I can't really demonstrate it well, but if I'm sitting down here like this, if I'm looking up, that kind of looks weird and uncomfortable, but so does this. If I'm looking down at you like this, it sort of makes it look like I'm taking this sort of, you know, posture of dominance or something. So eye level, it can actually make a big difference on how you have that camera set. Physically leaning in, looking directly into the camera. Lisa, do you see any you would like to discuss here? We've got lots of great ideas.
Yeah, from our group, the sharing of situations, taking turns sharing situations, that builds empathy, because others can kind of know what it's like to be in your shoes, because they've probably experienced something similar to maybe invoke a similar feeling. So sharing of situations when comfortable with each other. Also the use of reactions, you know, the emoji
Yay,
reactions.
there we go.
That was,
There's
yeah,
one.
that was a pretty common way. And then what we did get a follow-up question. Well, what if in a group, one person may not be using the emojis so much? Would that be interpreted as them not listening? So, I mean, it was just an interesting conversation that we talked about emojis. Sometimes people use emojis a lot, and sometimes other people don't use them that much. So it's
And
just,
sometimes establishing those expectations or clarifying the expectations up front can help with that. So if you want to see that, then make sure you mention it at the beginning, that use your emojis as much as possible. I'd like to see your reaction, so people know that that's what's expected. Or, you know, give me a thumbs up, if not in a rant, but here, you know, whatever you need to do to get the right attention, make sure that those are established up front. Make sure that people are clear about what is expected.
right. Okay, so yeah, we've got more emojis.
Icebreakers.
And this
Yes.
is Dick.
Hi, Dick.
Hi, Dick.
I think you need to try and make connections with people. And I think in Hawaii, it's a lot easier than a lot of places to make connections. And sometimes it's an accident. We don't have to do 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon. We're usually 1 or 2 degrees apart. We found out at the end of our phone call that we all had connections to Waiwa. Go figure. I mean, the chances of that anywhere else are pretty remote. But in Hawaii, there are always connections. Maybe it's a UH connection, maybe it's a food connection. And there are all sorts of weird connections. And just it doesn't take very long to connect. And when you form a connection, you see people smile instantly. It's like instant Ohana, you know, when we make a connection, and that just breaks down all the barriers at that point.
Right.
We feel like we're related.
That's true. That's true, Dick. And even your posture right now, I have to say, just seeing you lean in like that and hold your hands, that body language that you just used was very comforting.
That's the Italian part of me.
Is it? Oh, there's all kinds of good tips here. Balancing the room by trying to give various parties time to talk and share, right? Very good.
And one other related question to that last one, that time to talk and share. I think some, you know, people are nervous about talking on Zoom and or in a meeting, in a live meeting. They're nervous about talking. And so I think it helps, particularly as a mediator, if that's the role you're playing, to throw people a softball question, you know, to involve them by asking them a question, but a very simple, easy question not a tough question, just something so they can participate.
Mhm. That's true. That's very good. Greasing the skids, allowing people the chance to do that.
Oh, there's an interesting question here. It says, how do you handle a live interview on Zoom and the client gets emotional? That happens in mediation, yes.
I think here, I think body language there is really important. I think, really being aware of the expressions that you have, and here's where Zoom can come in handy because you can see yourself. So you can see if that look you have on your face is a gentle smile, or if it's looking more like a grimace. It just the subtlety of how you are responding to their emotions, I think, because that's all they see sometimes. Or if you lean in and look directly into the camera a little bit, you're not, not with a stare down, but just being able to address them directly by looking in your camera. You're not seeing them because they're down on the screen somewhere, but just like I'm looking at all of you right now, that can, it just makes somebody feel like they're being heard a little bit more if they see that you are really addressing them, that you're really focused. In terms of body language, I'm talking the nonverbal communication, nonverbal cues. All right, are we ready to move on? Lisa, any other comments?
I think we're good, and I think we'll have some time at the end too, where people can.
Yeah, we can talk a little bit more about some of these ideas. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, show of nods. Can everybody see the PowerPoint again? Excellent. So now we're going to get into best practices. Lisa, I'll let you take this.
Okay. Well, nonverbal gestures are often displayed based on how we presently act, our present habits, and the way we conduct ourselves. So one way to improve positive nonverbal communication is to practice. You practice implementing more effective ways to communicate nonverbally. So we touched on some, and we're just going to recap some of the big, the ones we want to make sure hit home. Make sure that you're paying attention. And how do you show that you're paying attention to somebody? It's having the eye contact. It's putting away your devices, turning off the TV, those kinds of things. Just really showing that you're present to your audience and to the people you're communicating with. Assuming that listening posture. So we've been sitting a while, so I've been kind of leaning back in my chair. Leaning forward slightly. Again, especially when you're in person. The leaning in, that's even now a phrase, leaning into, instead of leaning out when something's uncomfortable, leaning in and being very engaged with people that you're interacting with, important. Other ways that you can reduce distraction and show more attentiveness. If you're taking notes, I find that the most interesting parts of the conversation are so interesting to me that I don't want to be sitting there writing things down. So it's kind of a judicious taking of notes. You may need to take notes to keep some information straight so you don't have to keep it all in your head. But in key areas of discussion, sometimes it's better not to take notes. If you can have somebody maybe assigned to record or take the notes or the minutes, if you're the one in charge of facilitating that meeting. If you have that luxury and have the ability to have somebody else take notes for you, or taking as few notes as possible, or having a recording, maybe so you can go back and review, but in the moment, just really trying to be there and not taking as many notes. It's an idea that I have. Another idea is checking in with people from time to time, especially if the meeting is long. If you've got those in the meeting who may be a little, in an in-person meeting, who may be a little more quiet, you want to check in with them, just make sure that they're doing okay, that they're participating to the extent that they feel comfortable. Checking in also by summarizing is important. People know that they're heard when, after they've stated something and there's a pause, that you can reflect back on what you had heard. And you might not get it exactly right, but if you get most of it right, then they know that you've been listening and you've been trying your best to understand where they're coming from based on the words and their expressions. And of course, we talked about mirroring the posture of others. So, if somebody in the room is doing something, assuming a certain position, if you want to assume that position, again, that demonstrates that there's a connectiveness between the two of you because you're paying enough attention that you are, again, mirroring the gestures and the postures of that other person. Oh,
So,
and here we
so
go.
let's talk a little bit more about mirroring, Lisa. Thank you for that, because we actually want to address this a little more because it's really kind of interesting. Mirroring is actually a physical manifestation of a psychic connection, if you will. And it can show a good rapport, it can show bad chemistry. It's a connection, though. Another key to likability is to mirror the body language of another person. So when people are conversing, they begin to mirror one another. And it's a signal that they have a good rapport. By mirroring, you can also send a signal. If you do it intentionally, you can send a signal to someone that you trust them. We can do this intentionally, but we tend to do it more unintentionally. Again, it's neuroscientists can have a heyday with this, and the kinds of research that have been done. We just do this. We will adopt the posture of somebody that either we respect or that we are trying to connect with in some way. If you choose to do it intentionally, you can use it as a way to sort of test how the conversation is going. Adjust your body a little bit and see if other people in the conversation or in the dialogue adjust theirs as well. You can test the waters that way. I'm going to point to some of the images you see here, because you can see in some of them, it's definitely has some sort of a positive, you get a positive vibe from it, right? That there is some mutual respect or some mutual admiration. However, if you look down at our two former presidents here in the lower right side, they are mirroring, they are making a connection, but I would say that there's probably more of disdain for each other than there is. So there is a connection going on, and it's a way of identifying something they have in common, and that is that they maybe don't respect each other in that particular case. So mirroring is actually a very powerful sales technique. Next time you go to buy a car or you purchase insurance, pay attention to the salesperson. They will mirror you. I can promise that. Watch what they do. You can play a game with them, move around a lot and see what they do. They will mirror you. It's trained. I used to work with sales staffs, and they used to get trained in doing that very thing and mirroring the person that they're selling to. So you can sort of adopt, you make the connection. You actually, it can be either an empathy, something through empathy, or it can just be making some sort of a psychic connection with them. UN negotiators use mirroring when they want to come to agreeable terms in high stakes negotiation. They use mirroring techniques. It can be very powerful if you're a mediator or if you're facilitating a difficult conversation, not only to use it, but also to pay attention to it, to find out what's happening with the body posture of other people in the conversation.
Okay, more best practices. Practice makes perfect. Being prepared is really important. Since some nonverbal behaviors are harder to control than the verbal ones, which can be written out and rehearsed, we encourage you to practice what you can beforehand. And, oftentimes before you speak, before you give a presentation, it's so much in the preparation you actually spend much more time preparing the material and practicing the material. And the delivery of your material is just merely a fraction of what goes into the work that you're doing to lead a meeting, to make a presentation and whatnot. So it's just putting that time in and practicing and polishing your material is key. You can even try recording yourself. Do a dry run of what you're planning on saying with a colleague whom you work well together, or who you trust, to give, and hopefully that colleague will give you some honest feedback on what he or she liked about your presentation and maybe one thing that you can work on. And the way I've been trained about how to give feedback is you start out with what you like, the very positive. You put the sandwich in the middle, maybe one piece of something they can work on, and you end on a very positive and encouraging note. So doing that practice and seeing if you can record yourself and have somebody do a dry run with you is a good tip, and is always valuable for you to get that information beforehand. And of course, you want to come to your meetings as prepared as possible. And we talked about a little bit earlier, coming into the meeting, and you're the one, especially if you're leading the meeting, you're the one setting the groundwork on just the energy in the room and all this and that. So come prepared. It may mean that to come on into the meeting with a positive attitude. It may mean that you should spend the first, or before the meeting, spend a few minutes taking a few deep breaths and just grounding and centering yourself before you enter the meeting, and putting that smile on your face as well. Okay, and some other tips is, and this is what in mediation we've learned to do, is you really strive to be in the moment, strive to be as aware as much as you can of what is going on. You want to be prepared, of course, but while you're in the meeting, you want to strive to be in the moment and be as aware of what is going on at the present time as possible. That means that you need to be flexible. You need to see what's going on in the room and adapt if needed. If you're finding that people may not be sort of absorbing the message, try again or check in with them and see how things are going. So being in that moment, having a process structure, and also having that flexibility built in that things may go in a different direction, which is okay, because it's the group that's basically, what is important to the group is going to become apparent if you're very aware of what's going on. Okay.
That's really an important comment. Thank you for saying that, Lisa. It's an important comment.
If anyone appears to be distracted, take that minute, share your observation. If you feel comfortable, sometimes people aren't they might feel a little embarrassed by being pointed out. So use your discretion, of course, be in the moment, but you may want to share your observation, or maybe in a private, breakout room or something. In mediations, I know that if somebody looks like they're having a real rough time and we're in a joint session, that might be a time to either take a break or ask if the parties might feel better separating and being in a breakout room. And then I could focus in on one-on-one with the person who seems to be feeling the discomfort. And if they feel comfortable opening up and sharing with me, and of course, hopefully, but well beforehand, I've built that rapport so they can approach me more openly and honestly of how they're feeling. That's, when you find out what's going on. Is there anything that we could do to make this situation better or more productive for you? So yeah, check in to the extent you feel comfortable, the other person's feeling comfortable. I mean, that's the real art of being a mediator, a facilitator, is just having that sense and flexibility of knowing what's going on in the room and really addressing the issues the best way you can. So you use that opportunity to model that positive nonverbal communication behavior.
Excellent. And we're coming to an end here. We've got a couple more things to share with you, but we wanted to, we thought it was important, certainly worthwhile to mention forms of communication that are stripped of their meta. In fact, the worst nonverbal mistakes can be made when dialogue has no nonverbal cues, and email and text messaging demonstrate just how important nonverbal communication is. I think we could probably all, as a matter of fact, I'm going to let you take the opportunity to just make a few comments in chat if you have any to share experiences you've had with misunderstood texts or misunderstood emails because they do not have any of the nonverbal cues, how something might be misread. And if you even have an example of something, our next slide, I'm going to show you an example of one that I have had trouble with. But I just want to mention how important it is to not try to have difficult conversations. Don't even try to start or initiate difficult conversations through text or email, because you do not have any of these very important nonverbal cues that can show empathy, sincerity, sympathy, any of these important things that you want to convey. Okay, so the quote is pretty much says itself. I think it's worth reading. I know I'm not supposed to read slides, but on email, people aren't quite themselves. They're angrier, less sympathetic, less aware, more easily wounded, even more gossipy and duplicitous. Email has a tendency to encourage the lesser angels of our nature. And that's not just in the delivery, but it is how it is interpreted. If you are, if you don't have a good chemistry with someone, or you're actually arguing with somebody, there's something going on, those emails, I guarantee, are going to be misinterpreted. All right. So there's a book, an interesting book, kind of fun read by David Shipley and Will Schwab called Send. So this is the one that I have had trouble with. Thanks a lot. When I say thanks a lot, I usually mean thanks a lot. I really mean thanks a lot. I'm sincere about my my appreciation, and I want to convey that a lot. And guess how that gets read? Thanks a lot. Okay, so subject to misinterpretation. So if anybody has any ideas they want to share, or any texts or messages, let me see, I've got a couple here.
I've got a couple of messages.
Go ahead, Lisa.
Draft tips are drafting emails, but not sending them right away.
Right.
Coming
Read it
back.
out loud and see how you might interpret it, because I guarantee you'll change your mind before you hit send.
Some other little observations is all caps can be interpreted. I think could be interpreted as shouting. Autocorrect, sometimes it's embarrassing what autocorrect can do.
Absolutely.
Oh my goodness, if you don't read, if you text really fast and send
Yes.
it and then look at it and go, oh my goodness, what did I send with autocorrect? It's
Yes.
the opposite.
Public forums can take on whole new meanings with misspellings. It's
Yes.
crazy what can happen, and it can be very embarrassing.
And then even caution as well. These may be used as evidence. I suppose if something is contentious and just something gets shut off and on text, it could end up in court, I suppose. Yeah, I mean, yeah. I couldn't see why not.
Yeah, too many exclamation marks. That's true. Again, it can be just overemphasis or almost yelling. Okay, so we're just going to open up now. I'm going to open up to everybody. We're going to stop share for a second to see if you have any thoughts or anything, any ideas you want to share. You can unmute yourself or share them in chat, either way. And then before you go, we do have a kind of a fun 4-minute video that we'll wrap with before we actually end. So we're just opening the floor now. Are there any ideas, questions, comments? Anything you disagree with that you'd like to discuss? We'd love to hear from you now. Open your mic or chat.
Yeah, and we do have time for opening up your mic and sharing if you feel comfortable doing it that way, because we're actually a little bit ahead of time.
Yeah. Lucille, I'd love to hear a little bit more about when email conversations become risky. And she put in quote, "Can I call you?"
No. I stay away from emails that look like they're going a little bit off. I've seen too many explosions. No, I just wanted to share a little bit of a funny situation. One of our coordinators, excuse me, was using a backdrop, and it was the Golden Gate Bridge, with water, etc. But the funny part about it was every time she went to pick up a document, she was pulling it out of the water. And every document looked like it was coming out of the water. It was really fascinating. Of course, distracting as it could be, but I just wanted to share that.
That is great. So you see, meta is important. Meta is important. Somebody asked anywhere for us to get your PPT. I will follow up with, I will send the PowerPoint presentation to all of you along with the chat. And what else were we going to send, Lisa? I think just those two things. Somebody asked about the link. I'll pop it in again right now. Lisa, if you want to attend to any of these other chats, why I pop the link in. I put it in earlier, but I'm going to pop that link in again for that fun self-test.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to say one thing. I think you have to be really careful about mirroring, because if you mirror someone, it can look like mimicking, and it can look very disrespectful as well. You have to be very careful how you do it.
Absolutely. That's a very good point. You do have to be careful on how you do it, and that is critical. So it's not mimicking, and I'm glad that you bring that up actually as an example, because it's not at all mimicking, and it does take practice. You want to make sure that you are just making subtle gestures. Okay, I'm going to pop this into the chat. This is the link for that self quiz on emotional intelligence. There it is again for everybody to get that. Thank you for that comment though on mirroring.
Okay, there was a comment a little earlier about how emojis could be generational. I've noticed that also, that my kids use emojis a lot more than like my in-law, you know, my father-in-law, that it could be generational, that the use, I think, generally, I think you could say people maybe 50 and younger. I'm totally just like making up a number, but younger people, I've noticed that young people like to express themselves in emojis, at least maybe my daughters.
You cannot see the link in chat. I'm sorry. Let me try this again. There we go. Here's the link. Now you should see that link. Yes?
Yes.
All right. Thank you for the nods. There's the link. Okay. I'm going to go back then, and we'll just do this last video. It's just a fun video. So if you want to stick around, otherwise, Lisa, do you want to say any final words before we move to the video, and then people can stick around to chat after, or just log out as they wish?
Yeah, I really enjoyed this topic and presenting it with you, and it's been a joy. So love seeing everybody's participation, input, comments. It's just a really interesting topic to talk about, and I always learn a lot from everybody's contributions. So I appreciate everybody's coming in and spending the afternoon with us.
I echo that. And here, Lisa, this is for you up on my screen. And I want to say hello to everybody who came, and thank you all. I'm going to point to the references on the last slide to the research that we found or used and referred to. Here is Lisa's contact information. This will, again, it'll be in the slides that I sent you. I'll send a PDF of all the slides, and there's my contact information. We love to hear from you. If anybody wants to have any follow-up discussions, we welcome that. So we're going to quickly go to a YouTube. Again, this is about a 4-minute video, and enjoy. And stick around if you'd like after, or you can just log out as you feel comfortable doing so. Okay, so thank you, everybody. Take care. Let's get you to the YouTube now. Slowly but surely.
This is Tyler.
We will skip
Tyler,
the ads.
with Grammarly's help, is writing an email to his boss, Anita. Tyler.
No one told you life was gonna be this way. Your job's a joke, you broke.
I'm pregnant. And you're the father, by the way? You got it.
Your job's a joke, you broke. Your love life's the away.
No, I could get him to forgive us.
I don't know.
I'm telling you. I can do it.
Yeah, he can do it.
It's like you're always stuck in second gear.
He was like this crazy-eyed, hairy beast man. He was like a Bigfoot or a Yeti or something. Hi, just so you know, we didn't mean to fog you. We actually thought you were like a Yeti or something. Hi.
So you like the short hair better?
What? Getty? Danny?
When it hasn't been your day, your week, your month, or even your year, but
Phoebes? Hello? Phoebe?
I'll be there for you. When the rain starts to fall, I'll be there for you. Like I've been there before. I'll be there for you.
If you two are happy, then I'm happy for you. I'm fine.
Really?
Absolutely. I'm fine. Totally fine. I don't know why it's coming out all loud and squeaky, because really, I'm fine.
I'll be there for you. 'Cause you're there for me too.
Joe? Well, I guess Joey went home. Oh, and look, there is still one box that I have to unpack. Oh my God, you almost gave me a heart attack.
Oh,
Still in bed at 10 and work again at 8.
my best friend and my sister. I cannot believe this.
Sorry, but it's true. I love him too.
My best friend and my sister. I cannot believe this.
Burned your breakfast so far, things are going great. Your mother warned you there'd be days like these. But you
Let's put aside the fact that you accidentally picked up my grandmother's ring and you accidentally proposed to Rachel.
When people do this, I don't really know what that means. I'm sorry.
when it hasn't been your day, your week, your month, even your year. I'll be there for you. When the rain starts to fall, I'll be there for you. Like I've been there before. I'll be there for you. 'Cause you're there for me too. I'll be there for you. I'll be there for you. I'll be there for you. 'Cause you're there for me too.
So there you go. We're all better off meeting face to face, aren't we? Ultimately.
Go call a friend and meet person to person, and for coffee, I guess.
I look forward to it. I look forward to it. So thank you again, everybody.